Welcome to miniatures number 5. I'm going to do this in 3 parts, I think. Number 1, I want to show you the materials that I have to make these little vessels that I promised you in this section. These are the same kind of materials you probably have all over your shop. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble a project, get the components and everything ready to go. I'm not going to show you the glue up because that takes time for glue to dry. But then I'm going to go to the lathe in part 3 of this and actually turn one of these miniatures. One I've already got glued up and ready to go. So where does all the stuff come from to make something like that? Well, out of your scrap bin. So I've got a selection over here on the right of some of the scraps out of my small scrap bin. And I do a lot with redwood burl, so I have a lot of cutoffs of redwood burl in various sizes. Now this one's got a bad mark on the back side, so I'd have to work around that, but I could cut a corner off of here. Well, that's twice as big as this little vessel I can make, so I could take a piece out of that. If I do redwood burl, like for the top and the bottom of a piece, I need a different colored in this, something that's transitional differently in this difference. So one of the things I tend to use a lot is buckeye burl. And this is a piece of raw buckeye burl. And as you can see, all these eyes in here, once you get some finish on this, this just really pops. More buckeye burl. I could do something like that. Now I need a bottom and a top that are different, more contrasting. I could use, this is the base of an antler. If I trim this off, I could create an interesting top with that. I use a lot of holly. Here's a block that came out of who knows what. It's way too tall, but for the vessel, it might be the right kind of a top. Well, I'm looking around to see what have I got for bases. I have no idea what this is, but I know it's really dark. And I could use that. And I think that's going to be the basis of a vessel. Now, I need to separate these colors somehow. My sense is that colors tend to run into each other unless we've separated them with some sort of a divider. Let me set that aside and show you my other trash pile. This is all sorts of cutoffs of veneers from many, many different projects. Oh, red would be nice. One there, and maybe below the base. Down here, maybe a piece of black. So cut red. No, I don't like that. I think I'll put red here and here. And that's thick veneer. I don't want it that thick. That's better. Now, that's how I go about assembling a project. And I have all sorts of veneer scraps that I've cut off from all sorts of places. And what I end up doing, I keep them, I have a kit full of them here. This is nothing but scraps. And I buy my color from Sauer and Company. They sell them through the woodworking dealers as matched sets and colored. Well, it's kind of expensive, but I use so little of it that one package of green, red, yellow, blue, whatever, lasts for a long time. And you can get these to the woodworking dealers in matched sets. Well, I just want to show you, here's another piece of holly. I've obviously cut hunks off of it several times and still prepared to cut more off, but that's more than enough. I can't use these the way they are. I'm going to go to the bandsaw and trim them down in a few minutes. The veneers I'll trim down with a pair of scissors when the time is right. So I'm going to call that the next project, and I'm just going to move it over here to the side. When I do these, I always do them on faceplates. That means I can put them on the lathe, take them off, and get registration back every time I put them on. For some reason, I've had a habit of working with 1x8 face plates, even on my larger lathe, but it's just a choice I've done. But if you work with 1 1/4, You don't need commercial faceplates. Here's a couple I've made. 1 1/4 by 8 thread. It's a perfectly good faceplate. When I screw it on, it registers just fine, and I could have used those. For most projects, I start off, oops, dropped my glasses. I start off with faceplates on which I have mounted a large glue block. The size of these is a function that allows me to turn this down to any shape and size I want. I've glued them on, I've turned them around, I've flattened them. This is ready to accept the next project. One of these will be for the base. One of these will be for the top portion of the piece. And at some point in time, I go like this and turn the whole outside, pull them apart, turn the inside, and then glue them back together again. There's a lot of gluing steps in this, which is the part I'm kind of omitting. Here's the other thing that happens a lot. Sometimes I've got a glue block with a piece of wood left over from another project. This is Purple Heart with a piece of walnut on it. You know, for a project, I could very easily build up something like that. I've got a Purple Heart base and a little slice of walnut, sort of like a veneer. I can reuse this for the base of another project. The fact that this is turned down like this gives me a lot of good access. So be cautious when you're mounting your glue blocks to your faceplates that you use screws, good screws, not drywall screws. But be sure you know where the end of that screw comes out, or you will be resharpening and perhaps reshaping a tool when you hit one of those screw heads. So the other thing I use, I very seldom ever use CA glue for any of my glue ups. It has great tensile strength, in other words, strength in this direction. It doesn't pull apart, but it doesn't have very good shear strength. So if I get a catch or hit it a little too hard across the joint, there's a possibility that the CA will separate. I almost always use standard old yellow woodworking glue. It holds tight. I considered for this video actually doing the glue up on camera because I only need 10 minutes or so between each step for the glue to harden enough for me to go ahead. However, when I glue up a piece like this, every time I put glue here and capture a piece of veneer in between, the moisture in the glue is going to cause that piece of veneer, because it's made from porous wood, to swell, buckle, twist, and do all sorts of other unnecessary and unhelpful things. So I always keep them in a clamp. Pressure on this until the glue dries. When I'm putting a veneer in, my tendency is to glue it like right before lunch, go in and have lunch, and then come back out an hour and a half or so later and continue. Or glue up at the end of the day and come back the next morning. So I think what we can do with this piece is we can go to the bandsaw and trim these down to not the size I need, but slightly over the size. I certainly am not going to work with that. And there are at least 2 or 3 more projects in this piece. After I trim them to size, the next thing I do is go to a disc sander and make sure one side is dead flat so I can glue it on to the project, flatten the other side on the lathe, and then continue the build. So let's take a quick trip to the bandsaw and finish off prepping this set right here, this project waiting to happen set. See you at the bandsaw. I'm at the bandsaw and I've gotten rid of all the veneers, and there's the hunks of wood I'm going to use. What's going to specify the size of the project is the narrowest piece, and that's this buckeye that I'm going to use for decorative purposes. The base is about the same width, so I'm okay there. Actually, it's going to be smaller in the project, but it's not square, and I'm going to take just a little bit off. And then I'm going to size these blocks down to that same dimension. I'm not going to catch it here, I'm just going to trim it by eye. And the holly is going to be fine for the next, but it's so tall, I'm going to need to shorten it a little bit too. So let me make a few cuts here. actually use the fence to trim these pieces here. Now that I've sized it against this, it's bigger than that. That's okay. That's fine. These three I'm going to save back in the box for later. So let's see what this project looks like now. Base, veneer, bottom, no, bottom, center decorative band, top, holly. So it's beginning to look more like a vessel. But now I need to trim the veneers so that they're about that same size too. And I'll just do that with a pair of scissors. I'm going to come right over here with my scissors. And my piece, there's my scissors and the pieces of veneer. I said I want a black down here. And I could actually trace this out with a pencil and then cut it. But it's not necessary. So there's the base and that piece. And now I was going to use red between here and the decorative center band. And that red is just about the right width. So I'll just cut off a hunk. Buckeye. Another hunk. Top. And the holly's pretty small, so now I have all of, well, I dropped them, but I have all the components for my project. Get them all stacked up here so I don't drop them again. But there is the project. The next step then is to glue those onto face plates, glue this on, square it up, glue this next piece on with veneer in between, pressure, clamp, square it up. Meanwhile, on the second faceplate, I'm building down from there. Building down from the top, up from the bottom. And once I have those components all glued together, we're ready to go to the lathe and make a vessel. Well, I prepped one already. So let's go back to the lathe. I'll show you my tools and the setup, and let's make a little vessel. We're back at the lathe, and I want to show you my setup before I end up bringing the project over. I told you I like to do a lot of work on 1x8 face plates, and I'm on a lathe that has 1 1/4" headstock thread. So I use an adapter. You can work at full size, but I find for these smaller projects, I just like it that way. Also, this is an accessory for the one-way and jet live center systems that allow me to screw a faceplate or a chuck onto the live center. They are available in 1x8, 1 1/4x8, and 33mm. So this gives me the chance of being able to mount half of my project over here. So this is my basic setup to start with. Tools, 2 basic things. I have a machinist square because I always want to get a nice straight edge to take a look at. Magnet on the headstock, so I stick it there. The other thing I've done is made up a piece of wood, the square edge, and some 80 grit sandpaper on either face. This allows me, after I've trued up the face, to do a quick sand on that surface to be sure it's absolutely dead flat. The trick is this edge has to be square, so I just went through the bandsaw, trimmed this square. Yeah, right before the video I changed the sandpaper. This is on with just rubber cement. It's 80 grit, but you need something like that. Most of the outside turning is going to be done with my standard 3/8 bowl gouge, which I've used so many different times. For hollowing, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to need, so I have some options. Here's a tool that was a round nose scraper that I reshaped to make it smaller. I have used this before, may or may not use it. Here's my McNaughton small hollowing tools, the straightest one, in one of my handles. And this week I made another one. This is a little stiffer. It's a little bit bigger. I made a Delrin handle and I made this blade. Actually this morning I came into the studio early and heat treated this so this has a sharp edge. So that's another tool. I am going to need a parting tool, so I have a thin one and one that's just a little bit thicker. So those are the things I'm going to need to do the work, other than sandpaper and finish and stuff like that. So let's clear the deck and show you the project that we're getting ready to work on. I told you that I had to put these in clamps when I'm putting veneer in. So here's the base, all glued up. I've got red veneers between the bottom, redwood burl. I turned it a little bit here for the purpose of which is so I could get it flat and glue on my buckeye, very similar to the one we just laid out. And the top, holly, red, redwood burl again, and I have it in my press. I have a couple of these I built. It allows me to be able to clamp that up, put it in the press, set this whole thing someplace else when I'm working, and go on to the next component. So I built a couple of small presses. So here's the headstock. I don't know if that's flat. Here's the tailstock, or the base, I should say, base and top. This is the way the piece is going to go. I can tell you just by looking at these clearly right now, this is too thick. I need to shorten it a little bit. Neither of these are flat. So I'm going to flatten this, get it just round for the fun of getting it round, do the same on this piece, and then clamp these two together and create the shape. So let's go to work. Set the headstock aside for a second. Remember this project we just laid out? It's almost identical to the one I've got on the lathe. I'm actually going to glue this one up a little later, so I'm keeping the components stepped out of the shot so I could take those over to a safe place. So here's the base, and I'm going to make sure this is round and flat. Now, if anything fails on these projects, almost every time the failure is the veneer itself separating. Veneers are thin. They're made out of a porous wood, generally poplar, that has been treated and dyed to give it the various color. But I've had times where the actual layers of the wood have separated because that becomes the weakest place. The glue is fine, but the veneer itself may go. So we'll check here. But the safest way at the moment would be to remove this and actually use my tailstock for a second until I get this thing in balance and round. So let's go to work. I'm trying to wedge my tool rest in as close as I can. Pick up my 3/8 bowl gouge and check my lathe height. Actually, I want a little bit more clearance. Speed is at 0. Small project, high speed. That's about 2,000. So all I'm going to do is knock the corners off. So this is round, very light cuts. I just want to get those corners back. that aside and take a look at the top. Now it's not as long, and I'm going to work without the tailstock on this one. Set my press out of the way. Anything that I can get off the lathe, the better off I am. So this has been drying for quite a while. Light cuts. Okay, while it's on the lathe, I'm going to make sure this is dead flat. It looks pretty good. Let's check it. A little high on the edge. Fine enough. Now, the sanding stick. Just enough to be sure that's dead flat. That one's ready to go. And that unscrewed fine. We'll move it over to the tailstock, which is where we'll be using it. See how nice that is to have that? Now this has not been flattened yet. So let's do that. Let's check it. Well, it's looking pretty good actually. So let's just sand it. Good. Now we need to make some adjustments. I'm going to put the pieces together and decide. The center band is too thick, the top band is too thick. So I'm going to take a little bit off the buckeye, maybe about 1/4 of an inch, and then take another look again. This is all by eye and to suit your own sensibilities. I'm liking the idea about that thick. You saw my lathe tool rest do its little dance again. Pop right off of there, that's fine. Let's see what failed. Buckeye burl is pretty gnarly at times, and there's a little bit of problem right there, and I think rather than cut it, I'm going to sand it. Sometimes you adjust the project to the wood. By the way, bark inclusions, voids, all are easily included in projects like this one. So the base, I think, is about where I want it. Let's take a look again. Yeah, that looks better. The top needs to come down a bunch also, so I need to take it down. This is that process of fitting things together. I think that's going to look okay, I think. You notice I was cutting by pressing towards the headstock rather than across. I'm reducing the pressure on those veneers, and the possibility of them snapping is reduced. Let's get this flat. Now, one of the problems in flattening things is always that spot right in the center, trying to get it down. I'm going to cut it out anyway, so I always cut down into the center just a bit, purpose of which is make that problem go away. That's looking good enough to sand. A little sanding. Project's ready to go to work. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually shape the outside so I can see what it's going to look like. Since those two are flat, I can clamp them together. Pressure from the tailstock. That is working between centers now. Just lock her off. And I'm going to figure out how to get my tool rest as close as I can. And we're ready to do a little turning. Okay, here we go. Okay, a little guidelines on what I'm doing. I am not going to reduce the base to final dimension until later because I need that support when I hollow these pieces out. The neck will get cut off right about here. I have a real problem with the collapsed buck's eye burl, but you know, it's turned to powder. That's the way it is. It's going to be okay. So pull this away, get ready to do some hollowing. So I'm going to work the bottom since it's here. And now I have to choose which of these carving tools I'm going to use inside of here. Let's see how this McNaughton thing works first. Well, that tool worked just fine. I left the wall thicker than I would normally because, as you can see, this is a terrible looking piece of wood. But that's what we're going with, so we'll leave it. And we'll now go on to the top. We know the outside diameter of it. And I can use the same tool, but let's just use a different tool for the fun of it. I got this new one I just made. I'll try it in a second. I use this one for the hollowing. Since it's a thinner tool, well, I've got to raise the tool rest to the appropriate height. So, come on, tool rest. Okay, Now the inside of this neck needs to be shaped, and I'm going to do that before I part it off. It's going to be shaped from this side, not from the other side. So here we are. I just bored a hole into the holly. See, for this project, this one tool has done the whole job. So now the next step, we can put these pieces back together again and glue them together. Now I'm going to violate my own rules here for a second, because I always use yellow glue, as I said earlier. But because we're trying to do this in a video and move rapidly, I'm going to use CA glue. Normally I'd use my yellow glue, but for this project I'm going to glue these pieces together with CA, only from the standpoint it'll speed up a little bit. I'll put this piece here, put glue on this side, use this as a press, and then I'll pull it away, hollow out the inside of it, and then glue on the other half. Let's see if we can do that without the CA. Just a little there, put the piece in place, a little pressure, just a little pressure, and let's see if we can speed it up a little bit. The risk I have in this is that the CA will pass all the way through the veneer and actually glue the top on. Don't know that, but it probably could. Oh, good, it did not. So we've got this piece glued on, and now we're going to turn it round, and I am not going to do that without support, because that will fracture for sure. To my gouge. I'm trying to get it perfect, but I'm trying to get all the corners off, because if I catch it at the wrong time, I can literally split all the veneer. Now we need to hollow that out. If it's a larger vessel, it would be important to hollow it out. On these miniatures, you could probably fake it, I guess. See how good the CA did. There's another way to do that. Like that. Now I'll take one of my small tools. Oh shoot, look at there. It tore right there where there's no support. I'm going to keep that piece, and I think we might be able to get it back in there again later. No, it just fell apart. Well, that's really too bad. So here's what we're going to do now. I've got a little piece of veneer at hand. We're going to put these pieces together. And I'm going to put the glue, I guess, here. No, I'm going to put the glue on the other side. It's a little thick, which is fine. I'm dabbing it around the top. And I'm going to put it together. And I'm going to stick this little piece of veneer right in here. A little magic solution. And maybe a minute of wait. So, while it's drying, let's talk about how I'm going to finish this off. I'm going to let that glue dry, nice and hard. And then I'm going to cut off the top and finish this neck. Very last thing I'm going to do is to come down and finish the base. So the glue still running a little bit. Probably going to do a CA finish on this piece too. It's small and it works out really, really nice. I think we're going to wait a little bit. Make sure this is good and dry. That little spritz can't hurt. We'll be back. CA's dry. Let's clean up this shape here. this is where I stop until I get finish built up on here. I leave it on the faceplate until the very last minute. So I'm going to add finish, I'm going to let it dry, I'm going to add another coat of finish, let it dry, sand in between as necessary. When I'm satisfied with this whole piece, I will then part it off and complete the bottom of the base. At home, I would probably put this onto a small vacuum chuck I have and be able to come in here and work the bottom. But if I cut very carefully with my parting tool and overlap those cuts, I can have a fairly smooth bottom, which I can easily sand with my 180 and just a couple of 3 strokes this way. So I'm going to call that project as far as we're going to take it. Now, what kind of finish? I love to put an oil finish on this because it pops out all of this and makes it show so much better. I had said I might do a CA finish, but let me put this back on for 1 second and put 1 coat of oil on here so that you can see what that effect looks like. And I'd love you to see what this first coat looks like. The only difference between it and the last coat is the amount of shine that we build up. Redwood burl soaks in an awful lot of finish. So I'm going to need probably 7 to 10 coats to get this done. You just burnish that first coat in. Here we are. Scrap wood, veneers, chance to really use up some of those little pieces. And the design and shape obviously is all by hand, and not a bit of it was pre-planned, including the catches and the failed wood fibers and so on. Where are we going to go next? I hope that you are into your scrap pile and find some pieces, make a couple of small projects like this. Subscribe, please. Post your comments. We appreciate your feedback and the chance to do other newer projects that meet some of the things that you would like us to do. Where are we going to go next? Well, we've done vessels like that. This is a screw-on lid. But we haven't done it in acrylic. I know it looks like something you might be able to buy at the hardware store, and maybe you could. But I've done this in acrylic with a threaded lid, polished the inside so that it will shine clearly, and polish the outside. So next time we're going to work with acrylic. The cuts are exactly the same, but they're not. Polishing and finishing and getting it clear is another step we'll talk about. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for subscribing. We appreciate it.